A week finishing with correction for corn and soybeans, massive purchases from China, and an update on the Brazilian soybean output with Jerry Gidel from Chicago, Illinois, right here on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So, Jerry, after a very good week, we are having those corrections today.
Yes, yes. Yeah, last week we were optimistic, flying right into that crop report from the USDA in May. The numbers that came through really weren't all that much different than expectations. I guess in the world numbers, or particularly on the U.S. Corn and soybean numbers, particularly corn, were a little higher than expected. But basically, the market didn't find anything exciting. Started to find some oh, well, maybe I should step aside, or maybe I should put a stop in, that type of thing. And then this week we ended up having more forecasts of pretty good rains in the northern plains. Things out of Brazil were pretty quiet about what the size of the corn crop might be. And that the only thing that was keep on going was the Chinese corn purchases. They kept on coming.
Yes, and what do you think is that about are they out of stocks there in China?
Well, I think that they're looking at their overall needs here with their ideas about expanded pork. They've had some ups and downs. They've heard some issues where they've had another slight, or had some issues about African swine fever again. But in general, I think it does suggest that they're not wildly confident about their corn stocks, and it's a combination of both quantity and quality. I think their quality issues are maybe not as good as they'd like, particularly when you get into these confinements, hog operations, and that they can't have any kind of sour grain to go in those things. It doesn't work. You've got to. It's a process of keeping them on schedule and getting them through and a new batch in. And if something goes wrong, then all of a sudden you've got everything backed up and you've got problems all the way along from there. But, they definitely have talked about expanded wheat beating over there. And I think the key thing is that one thing we don't want to forget is that they did make some kind of agreement in the phase one that they were going to buy so many total bushels of U.S. corn and soybeans and other grains, and they're buying wheat too along the way. I think the one thing that hasn't really been a big factor for us, which I thought it was going to be, was ethanol. But at this point, I think that's part of it. It is a little, it makes me feel a little bit uneasy when, despite the market kind of slipping away, they've actually probably went ahead and did another 5 million metric tons of purchases this week. That today, though, they weren't a buyer, and the general idea was that I heard earlier here, late last week or early this week, there were going to be 8 to 10 million. We're up to about 10.5, 10.7 million metric tons of new crop corn in that, and we're starting quite a ways away from our harvest in the U.S. So that's a pretty significant jump in the market here from the Chinese.
Yes, and the big news we got this Friday is that Safras and Mercado updated their number to the Brazilian soybean output, forecasting that at 137 million metric tons. Do you think that would put the beans price down?
Well, I think interestingly enough, Sasfras Marcano's corn number was up over, what was it, over? I think it was actually at one time it was over 110, but recently they've had to take it all the way down to what, 103 or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure that Sasfras Mercado is an organization that's been around many, many years, and I think they've got some talent still there. But I guess in the short term, considering what we're hearing about what the corn size might be, and the fact that the USDA is at 102, and there's still a lot of people thinking actually last week it was 95 to 97 million metric tons. And actually I heard some commentary here from one of the consultancies down there that it might be as low as 91 million metric tons. And I think that is possible because there has not been any significant moisture across Mato Grosso do Sul. Been a few showers around in parts of Paraná and that over the last 10 days, but I would not say that it hasn't been steady enough or widespread enough to really say that there's been any change in their prospects of any significance. And if it continues, and dry seasons in South America are dry seasons. They don't all of a sudden become a wet season after they're a dry season. So I wonder, I think that's going to be an important factor for the markets to look at early next week, along with the Chinese buying and things like that. Maybe they're deciding that. And then the one thing too that's been floating around here is the fact that, oh well, they haven't been shipping much of their corn. Well, I've heard this next week's export sales or export shipments on Monday are going to be 80, 90 million bushels, and over more than half of that's going to end up being Chinese purchases. And so in reality of the thing is that if your prices in China are $10 or $11 a bushel, and the things they bought earlier this year were $6 or $7, even at the worst, why would you stop not taking your corn and find some reason to use it or wait for some other time? And why are you buying new if the old crop corn you bought is no good? I don't know. There's no real logic that they won't be shipping the stuff they've already bought. And also it matches up with that phase one purchases that they kind of stepped up and said that they were going to be interested in buying a year ago last January. So interestingly enough, it's still going to be interesting. I think there's still a lot of U.S. weather and a lot of Chinese weather and a lot of South American weather to go that we still haven't figured out our total crop size. But definitely the last week or so here, we've had a profit-taking siege, a stop-loss scenario from investors, and that I kind of feel we're in a spot to maybe solidify, but we got some things ahead of us to watch, particularly that northern plains weather situation here in the U.S.
And corn has been quite a different world compared to soybeans in terms of supply and demand, don't you think so?
Yeah, traditionally corn and the whole feed grain world, it sometimes doesn't get a lot of respect, and then when it does, it's like, oh God, it kind of, as we just mentioned here in this whole scenario about supplies of corn, there's always plenty around until all of a sudden you say, oh God, China doesn't have it, Brazil might not have it, U.S. is iffy of what they're going to have for the coming crop. So all of a sudden we had quite a significant turnaround year to year. If you talk about last May 2020 against May 2021, you probably couldn't find a different contrast in a market from top to bottom, or bottom to top, I should say, than we've had in quite some time. Now, the thing is I kind of feel like that we still have a lot of uncertainties here. I know there's some rain around right now, but it's a long crop season. And actually, if you go back to last year, everybody thought things were fine and dandy in June and early July. And then all of a sudden, by the time we got to October, we hadn't had that much rain in the U.S., and that had a significant impact on the U.S. yields. And so we're starting with very low U.S. subsoil moisture in that. And that's one of the things is over the many years of world agriculture, and that is that the deep soils of the Midwest and their ability to hold moisture during flash droughts, spot droughts, whatever you want to call them, and that it's come through. But once we used up all that stuff from last year, we didn't have a lot of snow, and we haven't had a lot of rain. Actually, in Chicago, here in the northern part of Illinois, we are running less than, in the month of May, this time we're like running 10 or 15% of normal. The spring, I think we're running something like 40% of our normal, and we didn't have that much snow over the winter. So that's a good indication that we're going to need very, very timely moisture going forward. And that's why I think that the action in the northern plains, corn and soybeans, is going to be of something that's going to be quite important. There has been forecasts of that since earlier this week. Actually, the interesting thing is, as the week has gone on, originally it was really going to be centered on North and South Dakota, maybe a little bit of Montana. The total amounts have shifted a lot further west, and the particular rain event is really going to be concentrated here tonight, tomorrow night, through those periods of time. And if we come sputtering out of there with half an inch or an inch of rain, and that's not going to be what you need, because what's happened is, like all the world, corn and soybeans are king, and so the wheats, and barley and canola is still going to hang in here because of its oil needs around the world. But at the same time, the corn and soybeans have significantly increased in acres up there. And that's why it's important, not so much to the fact that maybe we're not going to get as much rain on the wheat crop. It's we're getting enough rain to get the germination for the corn and soybeans. Actually, I've even heard some people maybe consider just tearing up their wheat and go to corn. But I checking with my sources up there, they have the same attitude I have. That's a dangerous move, because of the fact that if you don't have good subsoil moisture, you need a lot more of it for corn than you do for wheat or for soybeans. So if you don't like what's going on with your wheat, you better think about soybeans more than you're going to do corn. So that's another issue that we'll find out, because really, interestingly enough, in the world of U.S. insurance for crops in the U.S., May 25th is just next week for corn. Now, you can still plant after that time, but the problem is every day past that, you lose 1% of whatever guarantee you want. So you say 80%, then it's 79%, 78% each day lower if you plant and certify after the 25th of May. Well, it's June 10th for beans. So there's plenty of time to still plant beans.
There were some reports about the wheat yields in Kansas. Have you seen those reports?
Oh, definitely. They were eye catchers this week. Particularly, they started out with some pretty impressive yields coming from. They started in Manhattan, Kansas, which is the hometown of Kansas State University, and then they go to northwest Kansas, and then they go down towards southwest and turn on a town called, generally speaking, Garden City, and then they move backwards to Wichita and back to Manhattan, Kansas at this point. And they had some very impressive yields. I think the interesting twist on it this year, which makes it a little hard to guess, or interpret, I should say, really not guess, but the results this week versus past, is that because of the pandemic and that, they decided to wait 2 weeks past their normal date, partly because the development of the crop was not going along as well because of our cool temperatures. And then the other feature was they wanted to get as many people vaccinated, so that the people in the tour would not feel like that there's any extra reason, or to encourage more people to actually participate. And so that 2 weeks can make a difference. And we've had some rain, some cooler temperatures, and that and the growth factors, maybe it's not as far along on development, but from the standpoint of the number of heads, at least, it created some pretty impressive yields. 59 bushels. I can't remember hearing that one from northern part of Kansas, or the 56 and a half. They came up with a 58 bushels average for the tour. Wow, that's actually the last time the state of Kansas had that high yield was actually 56 bushels in 2016. So that's quite impressive. But there was definitely noted disease issues because of the moisture and things like that. Things could start to impacting the weight of the actual wheat heads, or maybe even hurt some of the stand along the way. And so there's some cautionary notes about that. and that. I guess the one thing that confused me was that the 58 bushels times what the USDA was projecting as harvested acres in Kansas turned up a yield of 400 million bushels. Yet the estimate of the crowd of people that was on the tour, they projected for the August crop report, not for the June nor this July, but for the kind of the final winter wheat number that's we issued here later this fall, that they thought the size of the Kansas crop would be 365 million. So that turns out to be a 35 million bushel less. Now, I don't know if it's smaller yield or maybe less harvested acres. Less harvested acres could come along as some of that being fed along the way. Definitely Oklahoma and Texas, as though, are the two states that really have a lot of wheat that's grazed out. Not so much in Kansas. So there's some data from this latest tour that's got people kind of wondering about how it all fits together. But in general, it's a better looking crop than we've had in a while out there with this recent range that came through over the last 2 to 3 weeks.
And what are you waiting for next week?
Well, I think that we definitely want to end up seeing how this rain in the northern plains comes through, how that seems to fit the bill. Also, how the reports about Brazil's crop size continues at this point. Do we see some more people looking for that to slide and tighten down some more of it? And also, do we actually see any buyers starting to show up here? We've made a significant setback here, in the corn in the 75 to $1 levels, beans over $1.25 or more, and that these are areas that probably 10 days ago people would love to end up buying. Now it's always the classic: if I get what I ask for, sometimes I don't want it. So I guess we'll find out if people are looking at it from there. We still have a long season to go, and we'll see how the U.S. and South American weather continues here, and hopefully see how the buyers approach it right now. And there's some good values out there versus where we've been.
That's it. Thank you, Jerry.
It's always good to talk to you, Lewis, and we look forward to next Friday.